So this is my top 10 tips, what I've learned so far writing my first novel, and these are the tips that I'm going to give you. But before we get started, the first thing that I want to let you know is that anybody that subscribes between now and August 1st, 2016, I'll put your username in a special thanks section of my ebook novel, The Eagle and the Star, which tentatively will be for sale on Amazon around Labor Day, September 5th, 2016. So if you'd like your name in my book, I'm going to make a special section, and anybody that subscribes, like I said, between now and then, it could be 50,000 people, it could be 10 people. I'll put your username in my book, and so you'll be able to see it in there and check it out. So that's kind of cool. So let's get started. So here's the first tip. So number one is make an outline. And that might seem like kind of a given, but a lot of people, I think, do it, but they do it with the idea that they're going to stick to that. So don't be married to the story that you've created. You've got to understand that your story will change. It'll adapt as you make it, as you write it, as you learn what works and what doesn't work. You'll get ultimately better at writing, and your writing style will change, and you'll see things as you look ahead into the outline that you've created that you kind of think, well, wait a second, that's not going to work now because I did such a good job writing this section. Those events no longer apply, or that's not the direction that I want to go anymore. So make it as detailed as you can, but again, don't be afraid to change it as you go along. The other thing that I would say with as far as the outline goes is, start with the end of your book, I think, in mind. If you can do that, if you know where you want to go, then ultimately you can get there. It's going to make it a lot easier. Some people, I think, when they set out to write, they just kind of say, well, I'll see what happens and I'll see where I'll end up, and we'll just kind of go from there. And for some people, that might work. For me personally, that doesn't work. I need to have an idea of where I want to go so I can understand people's motivation behind it. If I have no idea what somebody's thinking or what their internal motivation or what their long-term plan is in the story, then I have no way of knowing how to push that character forward. What are they being motivated by? I have to figure all that out beforehand. The second thing, I guess, would be that it's all in the details. And you've got to keep track of the fact that, details, character details specifically, you need to keep track of what you've told people, what you've said in the book, what you haven't said, what you thought about saying but didn't write down, and things like that. So the best way to do that, I've found, is to make sure that you can that you write down, as you go, the small details. Size, hair color, height, weight, first name, last name, who they met along the way in the story, things like that, locations, details, names, dates, stuff like that. Anything that's important, anything that's little that that you're going to reference later on. A good example for me was I introduced my main character to somebody early in the book, but they only were introduced on a first name basis. So later on, the woman in the story, her name is Dulcie Dargren, she says to the main character, Corbin West, she calls him Mr. West. And what I realized when I wrote that scene was that she didn't know that his last name was West at that point. So I had to go back a few chapters and change it to where he introduced himself by his last name or with his last name, and therefore it made sense now that she knew that his last name was West. So things like that, I think you can overlook real easily if you're not careful. But keeping track of things, keeping a detailed list of who's met who, when, where, stuff like that. That's a little different to me than creating an outline. But that's just keeping track on a single sheet of paper for each person, which is what I do. Just keep them separate. So the third thing would be quotas. And quotas, I sometimes think they work, sometimes they don't work. I try to have a quota, but it doesn't always happen. Today, for instance, I haven't written anything, and that's a first in a while. But I usually write 6 days a week, sometimes only 5. Just depends, because the other 2 days a week I got to figure out how to clean up and clean the house, cut the grass, stuff like that. But my daily quota is 2,000 words. If I could hit 2,000 words, then I feel like I've done pretty good. Um, Sometimes, and the longer that I go on, the more that I actually am able to write. Um, Originally, I was doing 2,000, and it was kind of a stretch. Like, that was pretty good for the day. Um, but the better that I get at it, the easier that it comes. So now I'm probably doing somewhere between 3 or 4,000 a day. Roughly, I'm at 70,000 words, about 390 pages, as of right now, and things are looking pretty good. So I've probably got 15 or 18,000 words to go. So it's my hope that within the next week I can be done with the first draft. But along with hitting a quota or setting a quota, you want to make sure that they're good quality words that you're coming up with. So you don't want 1,500 words that are junk and only 500 that are good. So taking your time to hit those words and making sure that they're good quality is pretty important. But if they're not, that's no big deal too. You got to remember that tomorrow's another day, and you'll be able to crank them out, the next day. And you can always go back and edit what you've got later. So even if they're not of the greatest quality, maybe they're just filler words, but you know what you were trying to get at when you wrote it. So later on, you can go back and maybe it's 2,000 words that aren't very good, and you can slim that down and make it 1,800 really good words. I highly suggest that you use Scrivener, and Scrivener is a seriously amazing tool. And I'm going to show you that here in a second, but it's less than $50. At least for me, it was. I purchased it for the Apple. I have an Apple MacBook Pro, and I think that it's worth every penny. So I'm going to try to switch screens here and see what happens. And so this is Scrivener, and as you can see, it's pretty easy to navigate. It's very clear. I've got it set up to each page. It kind of just lays things out. Now, when I write, I kind of do. I probably shouldn't do this, but it works for me as I'm writing. So I put big spaces in between every idea, and they kind of, Now when I will eventually go back through, when I compile it, and I'll do this, and I'll kind of put everything, together as you would normally do it on a book. So, but this is Scrivener. So Scrivener lays each page out, each file here is a chapter, or Scrivener thinks it's a chapter, and I'm going to change that. I'm going to make a bunch of chapters because I don't want chapters. Like, for instance, that's 18 pages, but it's 7,400 words. I think that's a little bit long for a chapter. Some of these are bigger than others. For instance, I think this one's over 20. Yeah, and I don't like 20-page chapters. I think that smaller chapters are better. But so that's kind of where we're at when it comes to these little individual things. Each one of these, I set it up as this is an individual line in my outline. So I'll show you that here in a second. So my outline, I set up, one chapter at a time. Chapter 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 4. And this has changed dramatically as well. But I don't want to give too much of that away. But as you can see, that's kind of that's where we're getting most of these little pieces. Now I've elaborated and I've kind of expanded on these as we go, but that outline initially helped me to keep track of where I was in the story. So, for instance, this chapter 17, I think, kind of evolved out of 2 or 3 of those little lines that I decided needed to be bigger, just to push the story along. And actually, this entire chapter really, hardly any of this is from the original outline. I mean, it just kind of changed and evolved as I went. So that's Scrivener. I think it's a valuable tool. It's a hell of a lot easier than using Microsoft Word. I tried that. I got about 20 pages in and realized that I couldn't remember or couldn't find some of the stuff that I had written in the beginning, which made it even more difficult. So this one, let me see if I can play from here. So going back to this, um, so again, it's kind of, we spend a lot of time wasting time, I think. Don't spend your time watching videos and tutorials. You got to stay focused and put first things first. And I think that you really need to try to get rid of any outside distractions that you can. It's very difficult to do, but you've got to say, I'm not going to go on Amazon and figure out where my book's going to place, and I'm not going to Google, how much royalties am I going to get from selling a book? That's the kind of stuff that detracts from the writing process itself. And the moment that you get thinking down that path, the moment that you start worrying about how much money you're going to make or how many books you're going to sell, is when you start to become motivated by the financial side. And I don't think that that's really the right way to go about it. I don't think that I don't think it's healthy for the creative process. And I think that ultimately it will cause you to write a book that just doesn't really have a lot of substance. If you start writing, for profit, then, there's nothing wrong with making a buck, but, you've got to really make sure that you're writing, I guess, for the right reasons and stay focused. And along with doing that comes being dedicated. Staying dedicated to your task, trying to maintain a consistent schedule, setting aside time and a place for you to write. That stuff's not easy. You have to tell people, and you have to make people understand that this is what I'm doing now. These hours I need to myself. I need to be able to focus. I need to be uninterrupted. And that's not always easy. We all have lives. We all have other things that happen. We have other obligations, but you really have to stay focused. And even if it's only for an hour a day or half an hour a day, if you can do that consistently and spend that time writing, you should be all right. You should get through it. It's going to take you a long time, but you have to be consistent with it. And you really have got to be sold on the fact that you can do it. Something that a lot of people just don't even get past. They get halfway there, and I don't know, something happens in their life, and then all of a sudden they kind of forget about it, and they never finish what they started. Networking is a pretty good way, probably pretty much the only way to promote your book from the start. If you network with friends and family and strangers, that word of mouth effect is tremendous. When I first set out to write a book, I didn't really want to tell anybody that that's what I was doing, and I don't know that it was that I was maybe scared of what they would say, or like maybe a little bit embarrassed, because I think sometimes people think, oh, you're writing a book, well, you've really given up on life, But I didn't know what they would think, and I didn't know what they would say, and I really didn't want to know what they would say because I kind of wanted to keep it to myself. And I also didn't want to get to the point where people were calling me an author. I really didn't feel like, and I still don't, that I was an author until I had finished a book. So I kind of avoid that connotation. I think that I'm an author in progress. I'm going to be. I'm an aspiring author, and I will be until I finish a book. But that's kind of neither here nor there. But the point is that you have to reach out to the people that you know are going to be able to help you promote your book. Your friends and family, your church, if you're a religious person, if you go, any kind of your office mates, anybody that you're working with, that you see on a regular basis, anybody that reads or would want to read, and a lot of people will. If you tell them that you're writing a book, they'll be like, "Oh, I want to read it," And these people have never have never read a book a day in their life, but because they know you, they're more inclined to read it and therefore more inclined to buy it. And that's a huge thing. And I should have added on this slide, and I forgot to do it, but leaving reviews on Amazon pages. You need to get people to review your book once it's finally published. Reviews will make or break you. If you don't have any reviews, nobody's going to buy your book. They want to buy a book that they know people have read. They don't want to be the first person to buy it. They don't want to be the guinea pig. They want to know that what they're buying is worth their time and their money. Because that's what people are investing in a novel. When they read it, they're investing their time. It's time spent reading your book that they could have spent reading somebody else's. So that's time they can't get back, and they need to know that it's worth it. So asking people to leave reviews is huge. If they don't leave reviews, they're not going to know that what you've got to sell is worth buying. That word of mouth is what's going to promote your sales. It's what's going to drive your kind of pre-release sales. You're going to get all your pre-orders from word of mouth, friends and family. So tell people, do what you can. Another thing that I suggest is getting onto a website that does like free business cards like Vistaprint. You can get business cards made really cheap, and just get them with a simple background and the title of your book, your name, maybe the website in which you put your pre-order stuff on. I know on Amazon it's like 4 months out you can make pre-orders happen. So 4 months before the release of your book, you can do pre-orders. I'm going to end up doing a pre-order here pretty soon, probably around the 4th of July. But put that on there and then hand those out to people. You can get 500 business cards, I think, for like $10. You can just hand that out to everybody. They'll go on the website, they'll pre-order your book, and you've just maybe sold, maybe a third of them will buy it. That's pretty good. That's a good return on your investment. Speaking of investing in a book, calling the experts is pretty much what you absolutely have to do. Proofreading and editing are huge. They're definitely worth every penny. I mean, I haven't done it yet, but I certainly plan to do it, and I've got a budget for that. And it's a pretty big one because it needs to be. I think that to get it proofread and edited pretty well, I mean, as good as you need it to get, I guess. You should probably be prepared to spend anywhere between $3,000 and $4,000. And that's quite a bit of money, granted, but you've got to spend money to make money. If somebody told you that if you gave them $4,000, they'd turn around and give you 40, that's a no-brainer. I mean, I can live with that. But don't underestimate the power of doing that. It's fine to send it to your old English teachers or people who are avid readers, things like that. That's great. But there are people who their entire career is based on doing a good job proofreading and editing your book. So I think it's a pretty substantial thing to have, and it's definitely something you need to do. Don't stop writing. Whatever you do, don't stop writing until you know what's next in your story. This kind of goes back to that quota thing. If you're writing and you're kind of stuck, don't stop until you kind of have figured out where it is that you want to go. I think if anybody looked in my house, in my windows while I was writing in the writing process, they'd think I was crazy. Because I spend a majority of the time when I'm not writing, when I'm stuck on something, I'll walk around the house and just kind of talk it out and act it out to myself. And it works. I mean, I can carry on conversations with myself. Sometimes I think I'm losing my mind, but it works. It's a good way to brainstorm, to think out loud, to speak out loud. You get those creative juices flowing, and you can work out a problem kind of on your own, and it allows you to kind of focus your thoughts and focus your energy on really getting, on overcoming, where you are, that stumbling block. So just keep the brainstorming and keeping the creative juices flowing. Keep thinking. That'll push you forward. Don't judge yourself with the stuff that you come up with. Some days are better than others. Just write it and don't stress out about it, because you can always go back through and edit it later, which you're going to do. I mean, certainly no first draft is ever flawless. There's always things. You write it, you set it aside for a while, for a couple of weeks. Some people say 6 months. I don't know. I mean, however long you want to, I guess. But set it aside, and when you get to the point where you're like, yeah, I've got to read it, we're ready to publish, go ahead, pull it out, and go through and rewrite the sections that need rewritten. But don't judge yourself that say, oh, this stinks, I'm a terrible writer, so on and so forth. You really have to be just open to the whole entire process. And lastly, I would say write another book. This is the last tip I've got. Write another book. You write your first one, okay, great. While it's out being edited and proofread and stuff, and that takes time too. That takes probably 4 or 5 weeks. So while that's all happening, make sure that you're you're ready to go with the next book. Hopefully, whatever story you've written is going to be able to be continued in the second book, or those characters will at least be able to be continued, because nobody wants to start a new series that only has one book, or that I should say ends after one book. So somebody may be able to read your second book because they didn't know you had a first book, and then they'll look and they'll say, "Oh, well, he's got a second book, or he's got a first book that I didn't read," and they go back and they read back. I also think that it's important to make each book stand alone on its own merit, and sometimes that's probably more difficult than others. But I think that if you take details and kind of reintroduce them to some extent into future books, if you continuously do that, you can kind of create a series where somebody doesn't have to read it from the very first book all the way through to the end. And that's something that I think that it's important to do, because you take the Harry Potter series, for example. That was a highly successful series, but you had to read the entire story from beginning to end. The entire series beginning to end. Otherwise, you had no idea what was going on. So it would have been really hard to pick up in the middle of that. But there's other books, by highly successful writers, that you can just pick up any of them and you just kind of can fall right into it. You don't need to read every single book that they've written before that. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. And remember, anybody that subscribes before August 1st, I'm going to have your YouTube name immortalized in my new novel, The Eagle and the Star. Tentatively, it will be available on Labor Day 2016, as long as it gets edited and back to me in time. That'll be September 5th, 2016. So check it out. It'll be for the ebook version. I'm not going to put it in the print version. It'll make too many pages. But it'll be in the ebook version. So check it out and then, buy it, subscribe for it, pre-order it, whatever. Check out my other book below. It's called The 5-Minute Life Cure. It's a meditation book. It helps you de-stress. If any of you are or need to de-stress, or you're stressed out about writing your book now, that actually might be a really good tool. It's a really good book. Check it out. It's on Amazon. I'll put the link to that below. So don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time. All right.